Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jamison Cable, and we are here again with David Kirkpatrick, and we're going to continue talking about the first and fifth governor, Isaac Shelby. That, he was the first governor of Kentucky, and Kentucky was a new state. So his basic administration was creating a working government. I mean,
Right.
this is a new government, so he has to appoint offices or create offices, create an income for the state, set up the court systems, create a defense or an army to kind of defend the state. Militia.
Right.
That's what it was. It's not a full-on army to say. And the borders of the county or the country. He is the border. The end. Kentucky was the western frontier of the United States. He had to be kind of that face out in the west, and he had to do it all. Yeah, the big obviously creating a new government was a big task. But also, Kentucky faced more problems, other problems. Native American attacks were still kind of plaguing the settlers, and the militia really had to. That was kind of their main goal, was fighting off the Native Americans, so that more settlers would come, more settlers would feel safe for coming, more people would get established, and so forth. A lot of problems from that, I guess would be the best way to say. Another one people probably did not think about or would not connect, or at least if they weren't, big time on early Kentucky history. But the Spanish, the Spanish was
Right.
was an issue, not like per se a war, but the Spanish had slowly kind of taken control of the trading of the Mississippi, and that kind of choked off a lot of the economic driver for Kentucky. So a big deal because, as you probably know, goods go down the Ohio. They then go down the Mississippi and trade and so forth. So,
Oh yeah.
kind of
Yeah, I
interesting.
think the British or the French rather than the Spanish don't have a very far-sighted view of things during the Revolution, because they lent all this help to the Americans, and then when it's over, they realize American expansion is taking off, and now they're kind of backpedaling a little it. You know, they want to kind of limit American expansion and settlements and trade, so they blocked New Orleans and places like that that you
Mhm.
could take goods down. So yeah, that's of the many obstacles he faced during his first term. I mean, the British and Spanish and the lack of support from the federal government, was one of those problems. Whether it was trying to get your surplus crop down the Mississippi, or whether it was defending against Native Americans, you needed that help from the government, and it really didn't seem like it was coming. So, um, Shelby began a campaign for aid for the federal government. So he's in constant contact with Washington, and he's able to well, there's not a Washington the president at this point. We don't have DC yet. They're working on that. Constantly in contact with George Washington to send troops to help against Native American attacks, and they're just begging because it takes militia will often defend their homes very ferociously, but they're not big on extended expeditions. They're not outfitted for that. They're not prepared for
Mhm.
that. And so you really need some contingent of the federal army to show up, because the Shawnee and their allies, like the Mingos, who had worked with them during the Lord Dunmore's War, centered in central Ohio. So it doesn't take much to come down, cross the river, and invade Kentucky. So Washington finally gives in, and he appoints. He appointed a few people before Anthony Wayne that met with horrible, horrible disaster. But Anthony Wayne is finally appointed to fight the Native Americans in the Northwest, and this effort's completely successful. And a treaty was signed, and for a while anyway, Kentucky has peace after the Treaty of Greenville, which pushes native lands way up to northern Ohio. And if you're in South Central Ohio, if you're in Cincinnati, you may be looking over your shoulder a little bit, but if you're in Central Kentucky, you're finally out of reach of most of those attacks. So
Mhm.
uh, Shelby didn't agree with all elements of the peace treaty. He had concerns about where settlers could move, and um, but he enforced them when he was able to. And he realized
Mhm.
that you have to take what you can get, and there is a great value to be placed on peace.
Yeah, yeah, and, I think, what you said earlier about the, French, helping out the United States, like, "Oh, uh-oh, we
Yeah,
this might not have been what might not have been the best move now that, they're moving out farther west." And that's exactly how it went. I mean, once the revolution was over, I mean, the floodgates kind of were on, not for many reasons, one of those reasons being, um paying for the soldiers. Here's your bunch of land out west. Go have at it.
right?
Because the government really didn't have a lot of money once it became a government,
Yeah.
which tends to happen.
Yeah, a tradition they continue even to this day. So, they and aside from that too, it's impossible to stay neutral on the frontier. It's like the Spanish have Florida, and it's easy to say, well, we'll keep the Americans out. We won't bother them. They won't bother us. Well, that sounds nice on paper. But, Jackson, a
Mhm.
few decades later, when he's fighting the Seminoles know that Spain is safe territory, or that Florida is safe territory. So they'd come out and attack American settlements and go back into Spanish Florida until finally the Americans invade there. So it's becoming clear to the Europeans that as America expands, there's going to be some problems, and they try to shut that down.
Yep, yep, yep. Yeah. Well, and like you said, one of Shelby's biggest things was keeping the natives uh, pushed out and pushed away to where you know the state wasn't having, like you said, people weren't looking over their shoulder as much to say, you know in the event of an attack, you would get warning, a good size warning, to be like, okay, something's happening, and so
Right.
forth. But and again, like, this is, when we look at his two terms, which we'll get to, the first term is very, tough, I would say, or there's a lot to be done. The
Yes.
French become kind of another issue. He had to deal with them in his first term, with the French. The French were at the war with Britain and Spain. Kentuckians were kind of sympathetic to their cause because French agents were sent to Kentucky to establish kind of a base of operations against the British and Spain. Um, but the concern the federal government. had, and um, they kind of insisted that Shelby prevent the citizens of Kentucky from fighting in any French-led conflict. You know, that raises a lot of political issues if the people from Kentucky are helping fight the French, but the United States haven't declared or done anything to or declared war or anything like that.
Right.
Shelby said he had no constitutional power to prevent such a situation, and soon after, Washington made a proclamation that all U.S. citizens should refrain from taking arms against a nation in which the U.S. was at peace with. So, what are you gonna do? He's sticking to his guns. Shelby was kind of has been criticized for his lack of leadership against the French plot or whatever, but Shelby interpreted his role as the governor was to have limited powers, and he did not cross that line at all.
Yeah.
He stayed true
And
to that belief.
for anybody who doesn't know, Genet was the name of the French agent that had been sent over to kind of stir up the Americans, and the French had kind of caught on that either they thought they could push Washington around because they'd helped during the Revolution, or they're determined to go over his head because when they don't get the help from the Americans, you're right, they go on kind of a whistle stop tour trying to stir up trouble, and as they make their way west, as you said, what the government had sort of interpreted as a lukewarm response from Shelby was really just him trying to be balanced. Genet requested an audience. A French emissary requested an audience with the governor. Shelby heard him out. He didn't lend any support to the French cause,
Yeah,
but out of kindness. And the federal government actually warns Kentucky on two separate occasions. Don't get involved in this. And Shelby has to that he's not. But the interesting
Hey, what you get?
times.
What can you do when the French caravan comes rolling and says, "Hey guys, we just want to talk for a little
Yep, yep.
bit." Yeah, but that's one of the conflicts that a lot of people probably don't know about. But the big issue with the Mississippi was then eventually solved as well with negotiations with the Spanish, and it kind of favored the U.S. and Kentucky well. So overall, his first term in office was quite successful. The state had control over trading on the Mississippi and had some financial stability. The Native American attacks had decreased quite significantly, and a whole government was established. So
Right.
I would call that a success, considering that, Shelby had to make it all happen with no real scandals, um, happy constituents. Uh, he set the bar pretty high for the first governor of Kentucky, or
Oh
for
yes.
Kentucky governors to come. So uh,
Yeah. If you visit the state archives in KDLA in Frankfurt and look at Shelby's papers, there are folder after folder of people requesting a job because basically, he's got, as you said, all these judgeships to fill. The county officials are kind of already in place because Virginia created a lot of those counties before statehood.
mhm.
But all these state offices have to be filled, and Shelby is just getting blasted with requests for things like that, with people offering to serve the Commonwealth,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
they meant they want a paying job. But yeah, in his second term really brought him out of retirement. Shelby said, and I believe him in this, as we've said, he was not a political animal, that he had no intention of returning to public life. He was retired. He was going to stay at Traveler's Rest unless there was some sort of emergency. And war with Great Britain certainly constitutes as an emergency. So with that looming over Kentucky, Shelby decided to hear his. He was reluctant at first to hear his name, thrown in the ring, but finally he acquiesces to it, and he's faced with his opponent being his neighbor, Gabe Slaughter, and uh, it's one of those stories where Slaughter actually people are already whispering Shelby's name, and Slaughter had approached Shelby. It's like, "Are you going to run for governor?" And Shelby's like, "No, I'm not running for governor unless there's an emergency." And so Slaughter goes, "Are you sure? Because I'm going to run. So you're not going to run." And Shelby's like, "No, I'm going to run unless there's a problem or an emergency." He's like, "Okay, that's good because you would beat me and that would really look bad." And no. So he runs for governor. The war starts. It goes bad for the Americans. Shelby's like, "Yeah, I'll run." So at the last minute, there is, nothing like what we see today as far as smear campaigns or dirt or anything like that. But there
Mhm.
was still, a little bit of bitterness there, and there were rumors that got in the paper that Shelby, was actually a coward at Kings Mountain. And my favorite anecdote from that is, they said, well, someone said he run at Kings Mountain, and a guy wrote in and said, I was there, and yeah, he did run. He ran up the hill, and 45 minutes later, he ran down with 900 prisoners. So there was this questioning of maybe his honor or his reputation, but it doesn't do any good. By the time the votes are counted, Shelby has 29,285 to 11,936. I mean, you've more than doubled the vote, which is pretty good.
Landslide.
Yeah,
Landslide. Yeah.
for Henry at the last second. So, and once in office, he went into military mode. The war had started with Charles Scott, who had been the governor before Shelby, and it gotten off kind of to a disaster. And so he decided that William Henry Harrison needed to be put in charge of the Northwest campaign. And Governor Scott had agreed with this also. The federal government,
And now Scott would have been the governor of Ohio?
no,
Or is that
Charles Scott was before Shelby. He was the
Oh,
fourth.
okay, okay. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
And
I
they
threw
met
me
and
off
talked.
there.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
they met and talked some. And they both wanted Harrison to be in charge. And so the federal government, stepped in and obliged Shelby, um, in making that happen. So uh, he was able to get military laws changed that allowed all men between the ages of 18 and 45 to be eligible for military service. There are some exemptions for clergymen, and I think if you were in the legislature, I think I remember that right. If you're in the legislature, you didn't have to serve. So that's interesting. The politicians exempting themselves again. But
yeah.
moving on from that, uh, when things really take a downturn in the cold weather that comes, Shelby calls for women, to make cloth items for the troops. And again, there's a letter that survives that's sort of a roster, like it had been pinned up somewheres, and it's the names of women and what they were making. 12 pairs of
Oh,
socks, or
yeah,
a muff or something like that. So, just really neat that he was able to pull the state together.
yeah,
Um, and it was just an impressive time.
yeah, yeah, and well, thinking about the old Gabriel Slaughter, who is a future governor, he does become governor, um, and Kentucky missed a great opportunity to have a Slaughter County, but, uh, for whatever
Well,
reason, it just didn't happen.
if you're going to war, I mean, what better than Governor Slaughter? That seems like the perfect name.
Exactly.
If WWF picked a Kentucky governor to represent them, I mean, you don't get better than that.
Yeah. That's so true, man. So true. Missed opportunity, but anyway, as the war, kind of went, it kind of started off as a pretty big embarrassment for Kentucky. That this we've talked about this before. You had different times when Kentucky troops were kind of defeated in the Battle of River Raisin. We've talked about that before too, and this was kind of a bit of a setback for Shelby, but he kind of did what any good leader would do: step back and assess the situation, and go forward and do the best they can. Um, by the end of the war, I would say that definitely Kentucky had fought or had regained its reputation. I know we talked about the Battle of Meigs or Fort Meigs, and the Battle of New Orleans, which all featured, um, uh, you know, uh, Kentucky people as well. But Isaac Shelby has another little good chip on his shoulder here. General Harrison requests more troops from Kentucky, and Isaac Shelby actually leads them into battle. And he obliges, and he raises double the number of people requested, and some of those a notable one, William Whitley, which we've talked about. And they head north to join Harrison in a pretty big battle. But I mean, it's pretty crazy situation that he would actually step up and do this.
Yeah, it's surprising too because, as you said, we've talked about this before. But Shelby's in his late 60s, which in the modern world of Jeeps and Humvees and that kind of thing, and flak jackets, is still kind of old to go to war. In the age where you're going to ride a horse to Canada, with a musket. I mean, that's pretty impressive. And so, the battle takes place on October 5th. Shelby rounds his troops up. And there's a famous line in one of his letters where he says, Kentucky being a horse state, he said, I only want troops that can ride. And we're going to go quick. So they get up there and they meet General Isaac Proctor and the Shawnee chief Tecumseh at the Battle of the Thames. And, it's one of those battles. It's a huge disaster for both of them because Tecumseh is killed and his warriors routed. But the British, not only does almost the entirety of the 41st Foot Regiment surrender, to the Kentuckians, the British commander, General Proctor, the guy who allowed the slaughter at the River Raisin, runs before the battle is even over. So he goes AWOL in the battle. He's later court-martialed for that. And when Shelby and the men return, they had broken British power in the Northwest, and the War of the 1812, most of the drama after that kind of shifts to the east. So he returns to Kentucky a war hero, for the third time, because
Yeah.
Lord Dunmore's war was impressive. The Revolution is nice. At this point, you're just showing off. He's awarded a gold medal from Congress in honor of his service, because his leadership really did make the difference with those guys.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the war kind of continues on a little bit. Shelby supported the war effort 100%. And, many Kentuckians did, like we said. Majority of Harrison's army were Kentuckians, the Battle of New Orleans and so forth. Um, some of the we'll talk about. Well, anything else about the war that War of 1812 that I guess needs.
Shelby had lobbied early on that there needed to be some sort of central control in the West, right? They've got Harrison who's in charge of the troops out here, but he said maybe a board of war or something. And so, what happens at the Battle of the Thames, which we just talked about, was Shelby, it really finally seizes his moment because the federal government tells him from the very beginning, thanks for the advice, don't call us, we'll call you, yada yada yada. So the Battle of the Thames is not just reasserting the reputation of Kentucky troops, it's reasserting Shelby as a wise commander in the West. So
as far as domestic issues, they were largely pretty much ignored during Shelby's second term, which understandably so.
yeah,
He was pretty much elected because of his war experience, and that was his whole goal, is getting the state through the war. You could kind of say that he was a bit of a war hawk during this term as a governor, but I mean that's literally what was happening. He was actually in the battles too. He has one more political action before that's notable. Is he leaves office, and then he helps Andrew Jackson negotiate the Jackson Purchase from the Chickasaw in 1818. So pretty cool little accomplishment that definitely goes unnoticed as far as that goes. Pretty good little, I guess, feather in the hat, if you want to say. I mean,
yeah.
after he's done so much, what else does he need to do?
At this point, you're in your 70s, but again, Kentucky's defense is on his mind. And then the native warriors had used the purchase area to go between north and south. And so Kentucky was always worried that there would be, this pincer grab around the state. So even with his last action, he's making Kentucky a safer place.
Yeah. So that pretty much is I feel like personally a pretty good analysis of his life and career as a governor, military officer, um, statesman, frontiersman, founder. He's got a lot of titles you could throw on his name. Yeah, probably the most. I don't want to be what's it called, cliche about it, but probably the most important governor of Kentucky. He was the first. You kind of he set the stage.
Yeah,
I guess.
I think you're right. And if so, someone might say, well, there's this governor or that governor. Not that other governors haven't done great things, but if you want a good measuring stick, Shelby has not just Shelby County, Kentucky. 9 states have a Shelby County named after Isaac Shelby, and especially Indiana and Ohio and places like that. So the fact that other states named a county after a Kentucky governor, I mean, that is kind of the proof in the pudding there. I mean, he's an important guy.
Yeah, yeah, and I just can't, you know, yeah, I just can't think of like, I try to think of some other governors, and yes, that they probably have done some good stuff, but he literally kind of formed the government, um, did exactly what he needed to do. He wasn't really this big politician kind of guy. And, I mean, and a lot, I don't want to, say like, he was the George Washington of Kentucky, but he was. I mean, that's exactly during the time that George Washington was actually the president, he was doing the same thing for the state, of
That's right.
Kentucky. Um,
UK has a letter that was written from, I forget who it was connected to, but someone in the royal family, like the secretary for someone such and such, in the 9 different
yeah.
titles. But they were writing a biography of famous military commanders around the world, and they wrote to Shelby in Kentucky. And
Wow.
these are the British. So
Yeah.
when your enemy is willing to do that, it's
Yeah.
pretty highly to your reputation. So
Yeah. They're saying, hey, listen, you whooped our tail. Why don't you tell us how you did that?
yeah, absolutely.
um, Yeah, another interesting thing that people may not know just about governors in general, and is that for the longest time, Kentucky, you could not if you cannot serve consecutive terms as governor. Like
Right.
I think it was a Patton, like that was the first governor to serve, and that was just like in 2000, wasn't it? Or
It was
98?
recent.
Yeah, it was in the 90s.
Yeah,
So they couldn't do that. So that's kind of interesting thing about Shelby. He was the first and the fifth governor. And I mean, if it was one of those things that he could have served consecutively, I'm sure he would have won a second term if he wanted to.
oh yeah,
Um, yeah, but it just goes to show his overall character. I mean, he was unanimously elected the first governor. He did an excellent job, and he easily won his second term in 1812
right.
as the governor. But overall, I mean, frontiersman, he kind of did it all, and definitely deserves the recognition. So, anything else?
Absolutely. Everything you could experience in Kentucky in the 1790s, Kentucky, Shelby had experience. So, yep, you're right. He's done it all.
Yep, yep. Well, I guess that'll wrap it up for Isaac Shelby. I mean, maybe we'll talk some more about him later, but for now, I think that's pretty good. So, thanks again, David, for joining us. Um, and thanks for listening. We'll see y'all next time.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable, once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you, the viewers, the listeners. We want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.